Hi everyone. This is part 4 of my series Faith and Fear, and it's called Our Inner Reality. This is really one I think that I just had to get out of myself. Just a lot of emotion there, a lot of feeling that I found hard to really put down in a structured, in a logical way. So it is one that is more get it out, move on, that needs to be said, but is maybe a bit less well-rounded maybe than the others. Living outside of ourselves. Many of us, to some degree, have lived our lives outside of ourselves. This may be a natural part of development where we establish our place in the world. However, I also suspect that it is a symptom of something malignant, something that is actively keeping us from being in touch with our inner personal reality and even existence. And this something is shame. Shaming cuts us off from our existence. Many of us live ashamed. Shaming is the effective way we keep individuals useful and compliant and teach them how they should act, if they are to belong or at least be tolerated here. It is the way the fearful stages and scripts we inherited that I looked at in part 1 protect themselves from being seen as constructed and enforce their authority upon our lives. Shaming could be the silent look of disapproval. It could be the public exposing of some vulnerability. It could be a parent's dismissal of a child's want or feeling. It's not that bad. We don't do that, you silly boy. Stop it. And it could be the violent abuse towards another to keep them in their place. Sharing threatens to temporarily cast out the individual into the other camp. Bad, uneducated, stupid, inferior, evil, or misinformed. Shaming is bewildering as no explanation is given. What did I do wrong? And this bewilderment disempowers us, for we learn we cannot trust ourselves. We learn that our inner reality must be unreliable or worse, bad. Shaming strips the person of their inherent worth and makes them an it we can ignore, use, judge, and cast out. For many, without much hyperbole, shaming is to bring hell on earth, seeking to light within the individual's conscience fires of disapproval and judgment that will never be put out, so that their inner truth and experience do not challenge, embarrass, or threaten us again. We may believe they deserve this in their disrespect. We may believe that this is an important lesson they need to learn, but we forget all this when years later these fires lead that person to depression or suicide. Shaming thus leads us to distrust our inner reality and experience. We learn that we know nothing except what others tell us. We learn to make our decisions according to what others think or society tells us is true, good, the right thing to do, needed, or useful. As Rogers put it, our locus of evaluation is external. We judge as the many do, as our group does, or as our parents would. We live trying to please, fit in, or perform. We may find it impossible to make decisions and know what we want, except to appease and comply. This feels safe. To not do so is to make ourselves judgeable, to make ourselves vulnerable to being shamed again, and so we live as if the only thing that exists is on the outside. That's what matters. That's what can be trusted. That's what our life is all about, until, that is, we realize that such a life has only brought emptiness and self-betrayal. For the distrust that shame instills cuts us off from our inner being and truth. It's like it gets slowly hardened. The surface may be the first to harden, to stop any of the wildness, the otherness showing itself. But before long, more and more of the center of our beings, of the center of our experience, where all used to naturally flow, hardens off too, until we no longer feel or are even aware of many emotions, longings, ideas, opinions, power, hopes, dreams. It's like we don't exist anymore, except as an actor on a stage. But this denial of our inner self is to forsake and to betray ourselves. This self-betrayal will play out in our chosen actions. We will contort ourselves, what we joke about, what career we seek, what lifestyle we pursue, what or if we feel, how we relate to others, so that we play according to the script and fit in successfully. We may realize that we cannot speak out for what we know is true or call out what we know to be evil. Brian Thorne writes of the self-betrayal he chose when a young officer across the road from an interrogation center in his book, Infinitely Beloved. And thus the promotion of self-betrayal via the shaming of selves is the means by which evil and oppression is perpetuated and left unchallenged. Self-betrayal is the necessary means by which the othering of people, whereby we make them worth only as much as they benefit us and validate any means to make them convenient, can continue. It is the way that our stages remain intact, though they harm ourselves and everyone else on them, as well as those thrown off the edge. Self-betrayal leaves us leading empty lives, prescribed by others, meaningless to ourselves and devoid of connection and delight. It leaves us regretful and can leave us bearing the guilt of our own complicity and cowardice that is not imposed on us from outside, but arises from within. But faith becomes a well to our spirit. So far, I've imagined faith as a place within us that is quiet enough to hear the whispers of another story, or still enough to remember an older story than the scripts and stages we find ourselves living on. It hears a story of inherent belonging and worth, rather than conditional belonging and worth. We could picture faith too as a still pool, still enough that the silent whispers or voice of these other stories can still make ripples on the surface. However, with this hearing, faith is deepened, strengthened, and revitalized to see what is beneath, what is within us, as valuable, simply because it exists and because it contains its own kind of truth and wisdom. It starts to dig down through the hardness that slowly accrued around our soul. Perhaps we start with trusting that what is down there is not evil, untrustworthy and unlovable, nor can it remove our place in the world from us. Instead, even tentatively, it is precious and life-giving. And gradually these waters of faith will erode more and more of the hardened defenses, so that we access more and more of the emotions, hopes, longings, and knowledge we have, some deeper, some shallower. And so faith gradually reconnects us to our inner reality. For many men, our emotions are a big part of this hardened off self. This hardening can stop us from relating vulnerably to others, from pursuing what is ours to do, and from challenging what is ours to confront. And so faith may start clearing the way for the emotions that are more permissible and more at the surface, or that have still been allowed to trickle within, as we come to fully embrace our whole contradictory and vivacious self as valuable, powerful, and trustworthy. We may have moments when some suddenly gush or erupt all at once, perhaps from deep within, and may continue to do so for a while, like a live volcano that has until recently been blocked off, perhaps even frozen. These may be the pains of long ago. If they are allowed to, they will subside and find their place within the swirl and flow of our being. Thus our faith can be seen as the meeting place of the hopeful stories of faith we hear, and the life of our own spirit that these very stories call forth as precious, belonging, and powerful. Its surface is disturbed and disrupted by the whispers of another story and the turbulence rising up from within, the flow of our own spirit. And these will cause turbulence in our lives, but they are the turbulence of a wise old soul we can trust. A new way of being towards ourselves. It demands courage to risk the condemnation and judgments that trusting our own inner reality and claiming our own belonging, worth, and hope may bring. We must let go of those fears that keep us from being authentic, or we choose the path of self-betrayal. Self-betrayal is rooted in the self-skepticism and self-cursing that itself is the only alternative path provided to many who are threatened with shame if they do trust their own truth. Instead of bearing the beating, the indifference, the rage, the humiliation, the cold shoulder, or the burning, guilt-ridden fires, we choose to doubt ourselves and even believe ourselves to be dark, ignorant, and wicked. The opposite of self-betrayal is self-ownership and self-blessing. We own our darkness, our cowardice, our complicity, our fears, our fantasies, even our hopes, delights, dreams, and drives, the swirling, chaotic flow of all of these and more. We do not attempt self-mastery, which always ends up in cutting parts of our truth, reality, and being off, or silencing, cursing, and burying them, or throwing them out of ourselves by accusing others of such things, until they uncontrollably make themselves known and explode at a most inopportune moment and in the most vexing ways. No. Self-ownership must go hand in hand with self-blessing. The compassion and love that sees the logic and value of all of these contradictions and swirling currents within us as they rise and fall, clash and join. Self-blessing lets these be and finds, more often than not, that they do settle. The soul can feel these parts that settle and know its truth. Equally, the soul learns to sense when a story heard by faith, perhaps in the spoken or written words of another, in the ways of nature, in the experience of the world, or in the intimate simplicity of a touch, how these stories meet with a rising flow of the spirit. And in that moment, the soul knows what it must do. Maybe this rising flow is the bellows of something deep within us crying out to be heard, that has for a long time been imprisoned in a crevice or cave within the protective solidification. And this knowing is not the ought, should, or must of our fears and our shame. Not to belong, but because our soul already belongs. Not to be of worth, but because it already is of worth. These are instead the musts of our spontaneous spirit that drive us towards life, the musts of maintaining our soul's integrity, the musts of claiming again and again the inherent value, belonging, and hope we all have, against the scripts and stages, shaming and fears that we find ourselves in and tell us otherwise. These are the musts of our inner reality. Do let me know your comments. Thanks for listening, guys.